It is Friday and the last week of the college football season in September. The weekend, of course, starts October, and we are here on a Friday after a game last night to discuss and a game tonight in the top 25 to discuss, but also the Big 12 this weekend, including Baylor at home against Oklahoma State. In a game, we'll have our pregame tomorrow at 12:30, kickoff at 2:30, and postgame also on 365 Sports. Paul Catalina and Craig Smoak as we weave through another weekend of evidence. Let's discuss last night, first of all. Brigham Young early on, it was kind of a back and forth with Utah State. Eventually, they just wear them down. They're better. 38-26. Kalani Sitake and company win the game.
Yeah, I think BYU, especially based on, you see the Baylor game, the Oregon game is, I think, going to be an outlier for them ultimately when it comes down to it. But Utah State gave them all they wanted for a while. But I think this is going to be a BYU season for the most part, where they're gonna have games where they are better, but I don't know if they're that much better than every team they're going to play, where they're going to have a lot of blowouts. But they showed what they can do, and they were physical, they were tough, and they held off the onslaught of Utah State, even though it got real touch and go for a little while there.
Yeah, it wasn't a great start for BYU. A bit of a slow start, just a tough start, and you wondered if all this was going to come falling down pretty quickly after the close game with Baylor. The big win in Provo, and then to turn around and get beat by Oregon, then turn around and then you kind of have to fight with Utah State. I mean, that's just part of the deal. But fortunately, they were able to get out of it alive, and I still think that there's high hopes for this team, but that was a bit more of a struggle than I expected it to be.
Jaron Hall last night was 17 of 27, 274, 3 touchdowns. Brooks, the running back, 11 carries, 90 yards and a score. Epps had 5 catches, 86 yards and a touchdown. Early on, Utah State frustrated him a little bit with the kind of the zone read, and the quarterback was kind of hard to handle, but eventually, the boa constrictor of BYU and their size and attrition wore down the Utah State Aggies, 38-26. Brigham Young now, they've had this early start with Baylor, Oregon, and now around the corner, they have Notre Dame on the road. And Notre Dame's actually a neutral site game. And then Arkansas visits Provo. So they'll set themselves up with what happens over the next 2 weeks after what they did as well with Baylor and Oregon. That's pretty darn good.
Yeah.
That's probably as good an early start of a schedule as anyone. Baylor, Oregon, Arkansas, and Notre Dame. Of course, Notre Dame is coming up next week.
With BYU being an independent and all, part of the reason you maybe want to get in a conference is that you might have a down year from some teams and you get a break. Mm-hmm. The last couple years, and I think this what's been really impressive about them, and of all the teams that are coming into the Big 12, I think they and Cincinnati are the most ready to kind of come in and not miss a beat, because they've been playing, like Cincinnati's been playing at a high level and has beaten some teams, but nobody's played a schedule like BYU the last few years to come in and really, depending on the year and the strength of the conference, it might be a dip for them for the last couple of years.
Yeah, that is the case. Like, for example, Arkansas appears to be on their way up. You could have played them 5 or 6 years ago. It might not have been the case, and that's the part of an independent schedule, as you mentioned. It's like Notre Dame. Some of the teams they play all the time, there's a stretch there when Navy would give them hell. And then on top of that, they would play Stanford. And Stanford right now is but there were times when Stanford was very, very tough out under David Shaw. Tonight, Washington, UCLA, we'll get to that one in the next segment or a segment or two. Grayson Grunhafer is a part of the show today here on 365 Sports. So, Big 12, let's go game by game, discuss it, chew it up, digest it, and then, again, come up with what we think might happen. We start with Baylor and Oklahoma State here in Waco, McLean Stadium. Not sure if it'll be a packed house or not. Electric crowd, I would think so. Third game, as Craig mentioned earlier this week, in exactly 365 days. There is a thought here when we look at this game, whether it's been from analysts who covered Baylor or even Oklahoma State with Robert Allen, is Oklahoma State seems to be pretty good, but we really don't know, and they will find out this week against Baylor, like Baylor found out against Brigham Young and Iowa State.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm starting to, I read, we haven't, I don't know if it's probably not on the website yet, or if it is, I read Craig's preview that he sent in the group email chain we have, and I'm starting more, like when I hear Craig say it, that I'm leaning away from this being like the 2 games we saw last season in the Big 12 championship and the one in Stillwater. I think this one might wind up being a little bit more wide open just based on what Oklahoma State is, and not that Baylor's defense can't kind of button down on them. I just think it's going to be a little more wide open based on, the attrition from each defense. It's going to be interesting. I can't quite put my finger on how it's going to go, but I'm starting to lean more towards more points than we might have expected if we just base this game on last year.
Craig, if Spencer Sanders doesn't take care of the football and he gives it up a couple of times or more, then yeah, it's going to be, I think, this year different, kind of like what we saw in the first half against Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game.
If he's doing that, how's that different from what we saw?
No, that's what I'm saying, though. But in the Big 12 championship game, Baylor opened it up, and then they had to go conservative because of shape and shoulder. Otherwise, that might have been a 2 or 3 touchdown game.
Yeah, there's a lot of talking points about Spencer Sanders and him turning the ball over. I mean, yeah, it's a good possibility. He does that a lot, especially against Baylor, but I'm not banking on that. I just think Baylor's defense is good regardless, but I know that Oklahoma State's probably going to want to toss it around 50 times. If you look at the first 2 games of the year, he had, close to 50 or if not more than 50 attempts. So then last week, I think it was down quite a bit. Because they played Arkansas Pine Bluff, or no, I guess that was 2 weeks ago, and didn't need him to have 50 attempts to try and win that game. I think he only played a little over the first quarter, so he's going to play the full 4 this time. I'd expect they're probably going to toss it around. I mean, if you look at Baylor, what is their weakness? In theory, it's the passing game defensively. So if you got a bunch of receivers and you got Spencer Sanders, I think you're probably going to try to chuck it, all around the field and try to hit that soft spot in the Baylor defense, so to speak. So I think that secondary better be ready. That back 7 as a whole better be ready. I think you just assume that their D-line is going to control the game and control the run game of Oklahoma State. So unless they're trying to pull a little whoop-de-doo, like we're going to hit you with what you're least expecting because it's your strength, and they're going to miraculously run for like 300 yards because of Spencer Sanders or Dominic Richardson or something, then okay, but I'm not expecting that. So how else are they going to do what they want to do? It's to do what they've been doing, which is throw the ball around a bunch. So that's what I'm expecting them to do. It just makes sense. I'm sure Baylor will be ready for it, but to what extent they can stop it, I don't know. And then on the other side, yeah, I think Baylor hit a nice groove offensively last week. And this isn't the Oklahoma State defense from last year where you're just like, oh, man, how are you going to, hit them? I think, they found the nice groove. I think you're going to see a good mix of shaping, zipping it around like he's done against Oklahoma State before, like he did last week. And you're going to see more of that run game with Reese and Squirrel. So I'm expecting some points in this game, not the 21-14 type games we got the last couple times.
Braden Johnson is a problem, a wide receiver with 14 catches, averaged 21-plus yards per catch, 3 touchdowns, 300 yards receiving in their games. Again, have they been tested? They would admit that as well, and they know. But he is a problem. And Spencer Sanders, of course, sometimes if he gets loose, and he can hurt you with the legs, and he can also hurt you as well himself. And that's going to be interesting to see if something happens early on, and that turns out to be, oh, my God, here we go again, if you're Oklahoma State.